A couple of more thoughts on helping the poor. Now let's take an extreme case. In fact, let's take an entire continent. Let's take Africa. Africa is apparently the poorest continent there is. There's roughly 1 billion people, that's billion with a B, living there. And most of them are dirt poor. I mean, dirt poor. There's in vast areas in Africa, there's no civilization whatsoever. The civilization as you and I know it. The most basic things in life, they don't have. The things that you and I couldn't even imagine our existence without, for one day probably, they don't have them. They don't have them. So what do you do? How can you help them? Let's say you're actually someone rich and powerful like Warren Buffett. You're Warren Buffett. How do you help Africa? Well, there's 1 billion people in Africa. You may have $1 billion that you're willing to spend on helping the poor people in Africa. What do? Well, you can give it to them directly, or rather, almost directly. You can buy them something. Say, we all know that Africans are malnourished, many of them, if not most of them. So you can buy them each, like, I don't know, a taco or a hamburger. There's 1 billion hamburgers, a buck a pop. And you have successfully solved the problem of hunger in Africa for the entire population of Africa for about 2 or 3 hours, maybe. Right? You see what I'm getting at? You've solved the problem of African hunger for 3 hours. What do you do then? You go on to the next $1 billion? So you see, it's not just the enormity of the amount of money that it's going to take to actually take care of their needs from the outside. But think about this for a second as well. The 1 billion hamburgers that you just bought, do you think that somebody just had that lying around, waiting for you to stop by and pick them up? And I'll take 1 billion hamburgers to go, please. I'm helping out Africa. No, because the 1 billion hamburgers does not exist. That's a hell of a lot of hamburgers. That's a lot of cows, a lot of wheat, a lot of vegetables for the pickles and stuff. So they're not just out there waiting for you to pick them up. They don't exist. They need to be produced first, and that's the key word: production. Production, right? So you can give them all the money in the world, but where are they going to get the stuff that they need? The stuff hasn't been produced yet. The next step: whose job do you think it is to produce all the stuff they need? Again, you can give them all the money in the world, but if there ain't no stuff to buy, and I'm quoting one of my favorite lectures at Mises.org, if there ain't no stuff to buy, what good does the money do them? Right? The stuff that they need has not been produced. It does not physically exist yet. And whose job is it to produce the things that Africans need in their daily existence, like clothing, like decent homes, because they live in huts with dirt floors and they cook meals just by making fires on the dirt floors in the corner of the hut. And that's why the childhood mortality rates in Africa are just out of this world, because their children breathe the smoke and the fumes from those fires, and they die early, and they have all sorts of diseases. Anyway, the conditions that Africans live in are just horrendous. So they need the homes, they need the clothing, they need roads, they need automobiles, they need stuff to exist, to have a quality, standard of living that would even remotely resemble what we have in the West. But whose job is it to produce all those things? Is somebody supposed to come in from the outside and build an existence for them? No, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. It's never going to happen. The only way they're going to get a decent standard of living is that by producing all those things for themselves, and or producing other things and trading for the things that they need. For example, I don't know, the Chinese are better at producing clothing, so they may want to produce something else, sell it, and use the money to buy the clothing from the Chinese, like everybody else does, right? But the bottom line is, they have to produce the material stuff that they need to consume in order to have a decent standard of living, materially. Why is that not happening? Why is that not happening? Well, it's not happening not because Africans don't know how to work. I have no reason to believe that they are less capable of working than anybody else. No reason. I believe that that's not happening. The Africans are not producing what they need for themselves because in many cases there's no infrastructure for that. And what I mean by infrastructure is there are no individual rights, and more specifically, there are no property rights that are enforced by the African states. In other words, those people don't lack money, they lack liberty. They lack freedom, and they lack the enforcement of property rights. If they had the enforcement of property rights, people would pick themselves up and build their own, themselves up economically, just like, the new settlers in the United States of America in the 19th century did. They came with nothing, and they settled in the middle of nowhere, just in a hole in the ground, and built themselves up, built out their homes and their farms, and traded and lifted themselves from poverty and built up wealth. The same can and should happen in Africa. What they're lacking, again, is not money. What they're lacking is liberty. They don't have liberty. They don't have capitalism. They could use capitalism. Really, really could use capitalism. So if you want to help them, I mean, giving them money, sending money to African aid, whatever, it's not gonna help anybody, because for one, the money's gonna end up with completely different people, with the warlords and corrupt politicians and government officials in those poor countries. And second of all, just giving them money, if there ain't no stuff to buy, money's no good. Think about another thing. 1 billion people is a hell of a market. Why are we not seeing corporations rushing in? You see, to establish production, to establish a market, to establish their presence in a new marketplace and capture market share and create production, create jobs, thereby creating incomes and wealth with people who can now turn around and spend that, become consumers in that market, and make somebody rich. Why is that not happening? See, even when communist Russia opened up its borders and the Western businesses came in, they, like flies, they all came in and they started setting up shops. The Cokes, the Pepsis, the Caterpillars, the Fords, Toyotas, everybody setting up production because they knew this economy is going to pick up. This economy is going to take off, and the people are going to have the money. And if we get here first, we're going to capture that market with our soft drinks, automobiles, whatever else, mining equipment, what have you. We don't see that happening in Africa because as bad as Russia is, it's much better in terms of enforcement of property rights than Africa is. There's much more capitalism in Russia today, surprising as that sounds. It's because it's definitely not what I would call a good case for capitalism. I mean a good example of capitalism, because it's corporatism and more like fascism in many respects than capitalism today. But even that is far better than what Africa has. So again, bottom line is, poor people in Africa don't need your money. They need liberty. They need liberty. They need capitalism. They need property rights. Then they will pick themselves up and build for themselves the existence that they want. And another thought. Can you give somebody liberty? Possibly. But there's a big precondition there. That person that you want to give liberty to must want liberty. They must want liberty. Because, okay, say, I don't know, hypothetical here, United States invades Nigeria, corrupt Nigeria, replaces, sets up the system of law, has them adopt a constitution of some sorts, kicks out the corrupt dictators, and they set up a government. What's to stop another dictator from appearing there? Only the people of, say, Nigeria, again, it's a hypothetical, can stop that from happening. But for them to stop that from happening, they really need to love freedom. So you can give somebody freedom, possible, it's doable, but their job is going to keep that freedom and protect it. Again, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Absolutely true. Applies everywhere at all times. Anyway, just a few thoughts.